across all channels and how we tie all of that together. We like e-commerce because it's a pretty amazing place to be. I've personally been doing this for a long time. First time working on the agency side of things. Prior, in earlier parts of my career, I've always been on the other side of the desk. E-commerce has been around a lot longer than most people think. You know, the official, or, you know, one story anyways, is that it goes all the way back to 1971, where some engineering students were figuring out how to get some pot on ARPANET, and that was the first official transaction. That actually may be apocryphal and never really happened, but the rest of it is a little bit better documented, going all the way back to 1979 and the early 1980s, when actual transactions started to happen online. And it's just been growing year over year ever since. You know, Amazon launching in '95, the incredible scale. I was back home in the States for 2 weeks recently. I ordered 48 things from Amazon while I was there. You know, the scale of what they've built is unbelievable. Last year in the holiday season in the US, 40% of all gifts were bought online. It's a massive, massive sea change. And we're up to about 8.5% of all global retail sales going through the online channel. Here in New Zealand, it's been a little bit late to the party, but it's catching up fast. So 58% of Kiwis have shopped online in the past year. You know, we are well past the tipping point with Kiwis adopting the online channel. I think one of the things that's interesting to me coming here as a foreigner is that such a high percentage of this business is actually going offline right now. So about 34% of the online revenue is actually being sent overseas. And that's one of the key things we've been kind of keying in on with different clients here, is how do we help customers sort of attack that problem and keep money here in New Zealand. The trends that are pushing e-commerce are only accelerating. Every social network, every platform, everyone is driving the continued adoption of e-commerce. We have buy buttons showing up on Pinterest and Google and everywhere else. We'll see where this all goes. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I remember it used to be called Frugal back in '96, I think it was, or I forget the exact date. But Google's been trying to do buy buttons for a long, long time. We'll see if they crack it this time, but the trends are undeniable, and it is only accelerating. It's not just about the online channel, though, right? This is, again, Google data showing the strong interaction between online and offline. A huge percentage of offline sales are now directly attributable to what's going on in digital channels. And that's because no customer is binary, right? We know this intuitively, but we still tend to think of things in strict buckets. You know, what are we doing in the online space versus the store space? But the customer is going seamlessly across all of this, right? And different types of personas have different types of ways that they like to engage. And sometimes you're more of a showroomer, and sometimes you might be just out shopping for fun, so it's not like anyone's locked into one specific mode. But we know that customers are going back and forth across channels. So when we're developing strategies and we're thinking about driving e-commerce, it's really critical that you take that omni-channel approach. And from an analytics standpoint and from a organizational standpoint, being able to tie all of that together, online and offline, is critically important. And the idea of this traditional, consideration funnel doesn't really work anymore in that kind of environment. In an environment where your customers are constantly jumping between channels and devices, measuring this stuff and understanding the funnel really has to shift to a new kind of model, which is about sort of a continuous process of evaluation and interaction in channels that you own and in channels that you don't. So you can control some of that conversation, and you're only a hapless participant in other parts of that conversation. And that's a big shift for a lot of retailers, because they're not geared to kind of manage things that way. I also think it's really interesting sort of what the traditional drivers have been in terms of channel preference. Why do people shop online versus offline? And traditionally, there were very distinct differences between the two. You went online because you could shop at midnight in your underwear and you got a good price, right? And that sort of, 1.0 version of e-commerce has held sway for a long time. And most companies are still sort of pursuing that single value proposition. I think it's a little bit outdated in this day and age, though, because it's a hard thing to do. Amazon has kind of won this one, or Alibaba, or depending on what part of the world you're in. But the idea of price and convenience is actually a really hard one to compete on when you think about things in a global context. The other thing that's happening is that technology is catching up. And I believe that these things are really starting to merge. And why you would traditionally go shopping offline, you can start to do now online and vice versa in terms of the reasons and the emotional components behind it. So what online has traditionally done really poorly is actually the main reason people shop. There's not a lot of people who actually truly need a new pair of shoes or truly need a new toaster or whatever it is. People shop because they want to engage with their friends, and it's an emotional experience that makes them feel good. And the social and the emotional are two components that that traditionally online retailers have done a really bad job at it. They've held on to this single value proposition of price and convenience, forgetting that that's actually not why a lot of people actually shop. So what's interesting to me is that this is actually starting to converge with the prevalence of smartphones and mobile devices in general. You see companies emerging, with loyal, whether it's Etsy or there's one example, but there's a million other companies out there that are really tapping into that emotional, social component. The social networks themselves diving into e-commerce as a revenue stream. All of this converging in the cell phone and delivering consumers experiences that are still cheap and convenient, but are also now, emotionally satisfying and social. And to me, this is where things get really exciting as the next phase of e-commerce starts to unfold. And to me, it's also important that we think about, how can we start to drive, how do you tap into those things? Because it is a globally competitive environment. The world is a click away. This is Nielsen data. If you extrapolate it out, that's not where it'll actually be, but if you did extrapolate out current growth rates of international versus domestic New Zealand online sales, the majority will start to go to offline companies in just a couple of years. And you have an environment here where there's many retailers that have kind of grown up without significant external competitive pressure. And that's changing very, very quickly with more and more foreign companies coming in. So it's critical that we figure out what is it that resonates, what is a value proposition that resonates to New Zealand shoppers that a New Zealand retailer can provide. I came here because I think this question is actually pretty interesting. I think New Zealand's a fascinating place where we can actually do things that are hard to do. The US where I'm from is obviously a massive market, but it's incredibly hard and risky and expensive to scale things. We can reach everyone in this country through relatively inexpensive media. We can test things without massive, massive risk. There's this really interesting, competitive, friendly, cooperative business environment where interesting partnerships get made. So I think New Zealand actually has an incredible number of strengths that it can play to that can kind of counter those other trends that aren't so pretty. I also think that there's some really interesting analogs looking at countries like, Israel and Ireland and other smaller countries and how they've kind of built an ecosystem around doing something different. So what can you do if you're a retailer looking at this? I think it comes back to creating that unassailable value proposition. It's not enough. Price and convenience, again, is not enough. You need to make things magical. You need to make things shareable. If customers aren't motivated enough to tell their friends about the experience they just had because of the product or the price or the person or whatever element of that experience they had with you, if they're not telling their friends about it, your job of acquiring customers, keeping them, growing share of wallet, all of that is just going to get harder and harder and more expensive. So creating a real unique and personal value proposition is critical. I'm running out of my 10 minutes, so I'm going to go through these really quick. I think this will be on a website somewhere, you can read it. It's not just about the product, it's about having a real data-oriented approach and using real analytics. The amazing thing about online is it's incredibly data-rich. And so tapping into that data is incredibly important, and basing decisions off of the data rather than gut feel is incredibly important. And then how you actually structure the organization around success. There's this idea, again, of online as a separate silo with different KPIs and objectives is it's not a technology problem, it's not a product problem, but it's an organizational problem that hinders a lot of companies, and something that is strangely hard to root out and fix. And so getting the organization clear on an omni-channel approach is important. And then finding people that can help you. There's a lot of, this is not just a commercial for continuous commerce, but seek out the expertise that can help you, because it is a highly specialized area that changes really, really quick. So 55 seconds over, but thank you very much.